Welcome! Today in our games industry series, we have Justin Zwack, the game and level designer from King Up Games. And he's gonna tell us about Cartos and Mario and what they have in common. Probably with regards to some boss design, is my guess. Because that's what the special thesis was about. And I'm looking forward to seeing what it ends up being. Welcome, Justin.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So yeah, welcome to my talk on Cartos and Mario and what they have in common. And yeah, as you might know, that big fellow here is not really Mario. But before jumping right into it, I want to introduce myself. Who am I? My name is Justin Zwack, and I studied at the University of Applied Sciences in Mittweida in Germany. And I'm currently working as like a game and level designer with now more than 4 years of experience. Currently working at King Up Games, where I was also working on the classical RTS Iron Harvest. We shipped that one last year and also released a couple of DLCs for it. And right now I'm working on a new project, which is like the working title Schießeisen, and it's a co-op action game. So yeah, to come back to the question, what does Cartos and Mario have in common? They are not on the same console, so that's another one. At least right now, only one of them is playable in Fortnite, and maybe they both like pasta, but probably not. So what I want to get at is this: like what they have in common is that they both have boss encounters. They are fighting like huge dragons or like turtle dragons, and using what you learned like throughout the game and trying to overcome these challenges with like what you learned. So with that in mind, what the actual talk is about is boss design and what they two share. And we want to look at boss design and how we can make use of like established elements, and based on a research framework that I did for my bachelor thesis, we want to look at common techniques and a general guide that helps designers to create their own boss encounters. So yeah, where to begin with? Like, why do I want to talk about this? So I was in charge to design the boss encounter in Iron Harvest, and therefore I asked myself, where do I begin when like I'm actually like designing a boss for a specific game, and in this sense, especially for like a classic RTS. And the general idea that we had back then was pretty straightforward. First, like we want to have like a big climatic finale of like all the campaigns, and like a huge mech this with like all its destruction sounded great. So yeah, that's definitely what we want to do. But what does this actually mean for us, and how can a boss fit into like a RTS space, and what are the limits? All these questions were coming up. So this was something that I wanted to put some more research in, and also, as I said, like write my bachelor thesis about. So yeah, with my own gaming background of more like action heavy games than like typical RTS, I asked myself if we could use some of the principles of those like modern action games and adapt them so that they are still working and potentially like working in different genres as well. And maybe there's something like a template or a guide or something. Maybe there are some more details that I can like pull from. So I set up a bunch of different like research questions, what I wanted to do with it, and yeah, started to look at boss encounters more holistically, and what I can make use of for Iron Harvest as well. So yeah, when we think about boss encounters, we immediately like think about a lot of different like elements that can be part of such an encounter. Maybe you even like remember like the feeling of being able to kill that big boss with your last final hit, or it's something where you think it was so easy to like understand what's going on, and you just like hit the glowing weak spot there, and it worked. Otherwise, like maybe there was something like pretty unusual to what you encountered so far, and overall, like the boss fights seemed to play completely different or was surprising to you. And yeah, with my first draft that I did, I tried to find a lot of these like individual elements and try to structure them and categorize them in broader terms. So this is where they turn into things like experience, challenge, reward and pacing, communication, variety, or even just like expensive additions because you have a lot of budget. And like all these things I was trying to get a better understanding of what's going on and what they might be sharing, even if they are in different like genres. And yeah, with that, I knew just I had to gain more knowledge about this topic, and I interviewed some yeah, pretty like experts on that field, designers that worked on like God of War from Santa Monica Studios, from ArenaNet people, like they are who were like really focused on the boss encounters in raids and these kind of encounters in MMOs, and also Creative Assembly, which had like someone who was working on like RTS and boss encounters, which was also very interesting. And then like in addition to that, I was also for myself like doing more analysis of boss fights, and especially like the dragon boss fight in God of War, like the recent God of War one, and also fight against Sister Friede and Father Ariandel from Dark Souls 3, which is a really great boss fight as well. And yeah, I tried to see what they might have in common, or what the different elements of those fights are. And then I used those throughout the development of the boss encounter in Iron Harvest, and try to apply my knowledge and what I learned. And yeah, I will be coming back to that after walking you through like the general workflow and the general framework that I created throughout my thesis. So this is the boss design framework that I came up with. As you can see on the left, there are a lot of like different elements that I will like shortly describe. But for the beginning, I want to check like, or I want to explain some of it, what it should do and what it definitely is not doing. So the framework, it creates a solid base before jumping to details. So you will definitely understand more of what you might need. It builds an understanding, yeah, of what you need. Exactly what I said. It's supporting also like designers as a step-by-step guide, because sometimes it gets confusing and you might want to jump ahead before like finishing up something that you need before going into the details. So it's pretty good to reorient yourself, and it also helps to focus on the individual parts if you take a look at something in a real deep matter. What it does not create the perfect boss on its own. So it's not like a rule set that it's applied and then it works. It also does not list like all the possibilities or like examples of different boss encounters. And it obviously does not work for every type of designer. You might be a designer that is more like of a freedom approach, or something where it's more about like the brainstorming part. However, like this framework is definitely more of a thing after you had like your first ideas or your first like vision, and not something where you need to like have everything in order. It's definitely like there's no one size fits all solution to game design, and also to boss design. It definitely depends on your game and your general approach on how you design. So yeah, just use what works best for you. If there are things that you may want to introduce to your own like approach on designing those things, then I'd be happy if it is of help to anybody. So now let's go through the individual, let's say, chunks of the framework. First of all, we have the constraints. This is like some basic stuff about what it might influence in your boss encounter, which comes down to the core mechanics, the target audience, and like other restrictions. And the core mechanics, this is where you should like understand and like analyze the core loop of your game and what the individual player actions are that you want to make use of. You decide on a focus for the boss fight, so what you want to like create here, but also for the target audience point, you want to know and like adjust the difficulty based on the player types and also like the focus that I mentioned. And yeah, you also want to know and use the expectations of this like target group that you have. Then other restrictions like fills up like basically everything that you might need because of scope of story or time. So for example, because of story reasons, this boss encounter, like you cannot actually like defeat the boss because like they need to survive and come back or whatever. Or there are some other reasons of technological things where it's like, yeah, we could introduce like a new player here, but our like multiplayer doesn't work like that or whatever. So yeah, you think basically about any possible like gameplay limitations for your boss fight, just to have them out there and know in which limits and in which scope you're designing. Then the next one is the purpose of the boss fight. Like every boss should have a purpose, and it can be a rather like simple one or a really complex one, but you want to make sure that it's not just out there for no reason, but rather have like a mechanical intent and like a specific aimed experience that you want to create. From a mechanical point of view, it can be just blocking the progress for the narrative, or resolving the narrative as well, or like testing like a specific skill that the players need to know before engaging with the rest of the content. So it can also work as like a gate. All these things like can come in like individually or all as one. There's no rule on that, but definitely you want to know before you go into the details of what it is that you want to actually like make here. Then also you want to understand what the experience is that you create and what the player should feel, what it stands out, what you want to create as a kind of fun. So is it more of a thrill, or maybe like the player should just feel very powerful now because like we're already late in the game. Stuff like that should help you to like define the goals of the encounter and what you want to achieve with it. Then the next one is the pillars section. This is where we have like the basics that are like working within the constraints and within the purpose. So you have the gameplay, pacing, narrative, and aesthetic pillars, so to say. And yeah, in the gameplay, you communicate the high-level design of what it should play like what are the basic beats of the overall gameplay. You combine different gameplay concepts that you had probably like in a brainstorming session, or like based on some of the docs beforehand that you definitely want to like introduce here or like make use of. Then yeah, the pacing is definitely a big part for every boss fight, especially those that are like multi-staged. So you want to rise the tension through challenge, but also through like the intensity of just like a lot of spectacle. And on the other side, you want to also cater breaks and create climax. So having like different values within your pacing is definitely helping with the overall flow of the boss fight. Then in the narrative aspect, you want to list like a lot of these elements that are like connected to the gameplay. So as I said, if there are specific reasons from a narrative point of view for how certain things need to play out, or otherwise how certain characters need to express themselves within the gameplay, but also how the narrative is influencing the progression. That's also like a big point, especially if you have cutscenes either in between or like at the beginning or the end of the overall fight. Then the aesthetics, they should obviously support like the communication of what you what mechanics you will have, and there should also be some kind of rules that you follow. You may also want to like break some rules. That is also obviously possible and pretty typical for bosses that are playing around with expectations. But you definitely want to get that down and see like what you want to follow on and what you don't want to, or like want to break in this special case. So yeah, play around with already established expectations, with tropes, with like things that are pretty easy to understand and fast to communicate. Then yeah, you with all of that, you set the main vision of the fight and how you want to communicate its goals. Like this is very important for most boss encounters, because you want to have the player on board like immediately, and then you can play around with like elements and with like how it actually plays out with the different beats. So having a solid work done here is pretty important for the next part. And the next part is like are the components of the actual boss fight. So this is where the meat is. This is where like a lot of things are put together, and all of them are basically building the actual boss fight. So we start with like the actors, which are where we are listing like all relevant actors. We have we have the boss it's like themselves that are like probably have like fulfilling a specific role, and also maybe some kind of minions that the boss is like spawning, or we have obviously like the player characters that you can work with. Everything should be in there. We definitely want to make sure that we're not forgetting like a specific character that should be in there, or otherwise we shouldn't like forget about their functionality and their abilities. So then we have the environment, which is like which can like direct the focus on certain things. So you want to like highlight either interaction points that are relevant for the gameplay, so like hinting towards the gameplay, but it can also just serve as a gameplay as well. So like the environment is basically limiting the play space around a boss fight, and as more like the boss fight progresses, you could play around with shrinking or widening this play space and creating more a more intense version as you come closer and closer with the boss. It also can tell a story. I forgot about that point, but yeah, it's definitely a huge thing, because you can already like create a lot of like world building just by the like where the boss is like situated, and what it tells about the boss itself, but also about the world. So definitely a very important point as well. Then one of the most famous ones, I think, are like phases and like escalation of a boss fight, because in most situations, bosses are not just like simple foes, simple monsters that you just defeat and there's nothing that changes, but bosses are like they tend to have more complex like things that are evolving, and their behavior is changing. And so with these phases, you can adjust like the intensity of the fight. You can add variation and surprise. Like you think you defeated the boss, but actually no, the bars fills again, like the health bar fills again, and you have to fight it like another time. You can also like communicate a lot with those phases, and you also need to communicate a lot and to make it like make the player aware of those different phases and show a little bit of the progression throughout the boss fight. And also what phases tend to do are creating or like adjusting movesets. So that's the next point. You want to be very clear and precise with what the individual moves will be, and here you can be like quite like crazy about like what the boss will be able to do, but you definitely want to make it understandable, but also for yourself when designing those things, you need to be pretty precise on what they will actually do, what's their purpose, and then like how this will evolve. You also want to look at like offensive and defensive moves. So obviously bosses want to crush like the enemy, but you also want to check like what the defensive options are, whether like the player is like constantly attacking the boss. How can the boss like escape or still like attack the enemy or like the player? So you need to look at like different angles to move. Like for movesets, you need to look at different angles for the boss fight, and then you can describe like patterns of moves after moves after moves, or like their effects. And yeah, then like I said, players want to deal damage to your boss in any way, or at least they want to progress through like this boss fight. So you need to conceptualize eventually multiple ways how you can harm the boss, and also yeah, maybe some other more like puzzly elements on how you can progress through this boss fight. And yeah, then we have the other side of dealing damage, which is actually like surviving the boss fight. So you in most situations, you don't want to just focus on like the dealing damage part, but also how the players are actually able to survive the attacks, or like the time pressure, or anything that is part of your encounter. So you want to draft ways how you can avoid the boss itself, or the different abilities and moves that they use. And with that, you also want to create breaks where it's necessary, where you need like a moment to breathe, or a moment to re-strategize. Things where it's about, okay, maybe I need to change my priority. I need to adapt my play style because things have changed. And with that comes also windows of opportunity. Those are yeah, where you actually can either like deal damage or survive and like adapt your strategy. So you want to describe those vulnerable states of the boss, or at least those states where you open up for specific actions. You want to create a delta of chance, which means that you shift around with like the enemy being able, like the boss being able to attack you, and you just have a very small window where you could attack them, but also more broader windows of opportunity where the player can understand, now I might have the chance to actually hit him, like not only once, but maybe with my big gun, like, or my combo, and try to get as much in there as I can. And then once you actually like made it to the last like health point, it comes to the coup de grace, which is I hope I like what's the word, pronunciate it right. It's the like final blow of the boss. It's like the last hit that you're doing to actually like defeat the boss. And this is where you want to describe like how it feels to actually like finish it, how like it should play out. Is there anything like special that you need to add? You can definitely utilize this last critical hit as like its own action. Like God of War is doing that a lot, or like I mean, Doom builds its own system about like defeating smaller enemies with like a specific action, and you can definitely create a lot of satisfaction just from like the just from the finishing blow itself, but also you want to like create some kind of reward afterwards. That's like the next point. You want to give a meaningful desire to why you want to do it, obviously, and you also want to like create something that like makes it as valuable as it felt like from a player like from a mechanical perspective. So you could like, as we already discussed, have a narrative conclusion here. You can have like a valuable loot that is maybe even connected to the story of the boss, which makes it even more special. Or you might even be able to extend your features, or like a Mega Man style where you have the opportunity to basically steal one of the abilities of the boss. So there are a lot of things, but it's definitely a cool thing, I think, to connect it somewhat to the boss and not only have it a regular diamond that is pretty good for your inventory probably, but not really like connected to the rest of the boss fight. And so yeah, like all these like different components, they show possibilities and they guide the player's experience and fun. This means you want to take a look at all these different things. You want to focus on like one thing more than the other maybe for your game, but they all come down and yeah, will end up forming and shaping your overall boss fight. So yeah, with all of that, with all these like explanations that I had right now, we're coming to the actual Iron Harvest boss fight that I was like in charge for, and that we were developing over a lot of we had a lot of like challenges that we faced throughout the development here. And yeah, before like going into the details, before going into like the different parts of the boss framework and how it's shaped, let's take a look at the final result. The boss fights, it's like the premise is pretty simple. It's about destroying this huge mech that you can see here, which is named like Icarus or Project Icarus. And yeah, you need to destroy this huge mech before it gathers enough energy that it detonates an electrical, like an energy bomb. And to charge this EMP bomb to its full capacity, the mech must walk like to different, like several different power supplies, one after another. And while charging the energy at like this specific location, Icarus needs to lower its defensive and like fill the energy. And while doing that, you can actually harm the enemy. And then once you inflicted enough damage, or like once once Icarus has filled up enough energy, it starts to walk to the next one. And this is like a very basic setup where it's about when to actually apply damage and when you can't deal damage on it. And like those two distinct states create a gameplay loop that is really simple, like simple enough to understand at a glance, but it provides enough opportunities for us to control the pacing throughout the overall fight. So now, if we look at the constraints that we had from like the beginning, we analyzed the core loop and the play actions of like a general like RTS, but also like our individual game. We looked at our target audience, and yeah, and decided like what the focus for a boss fight as well as the intended difficulty would be. We also took a look at like other constraints like scope, story, and time. There was a lot of like focus on the story, as it's like the final like climax of 3 different campaigns. And yeah, in Iron Harvest, the gameplay is like particularly focusing on unit management and strategy building. So those 2 were very high on the agenda. We also have a lot of like the macro management of how players are using their units, and like this one is essential, but also we have some micromanagement in how you use like the special abilities. We also have like a cover system for units and how you separate those from like enemies. And even though we also have a lot of like building structures and like units in our game, we definitely understood very early that we want to exclude that from the boss fight, because it just like the resource management would draw away so much attention from the player, that we decided, okay, we want to have a more straightforward approach with a simple objective, and that can be built even without this part of the game. Then the next one would be the purpose of the boss fight, and to define that, we elaborated the mechanical intent and clarified to what degree it should like block progress, test skills, add variation, or resolve the narrative. And we also established the general experience, what we want to aim for. And on a mechanical level, the boss fight is about testing the player's skill of using and managing the hero units and their abilities. You like should play with like not all, but like we have 6 different heroes there, and you want to all like use those to their best of abilities that you can. And as like it is the last mission in the campaign, the encounter is the last progress block to resolve the overall narrative of all 3 campaigns. So that's like a huge motivation, because the previous mission that we had beforehand was like the final test in a test of in terms of like RTS gameplay skills. So a lot more of management and using a lot of like units. We decided that this boss fight here, it may not be like the most difficult mission, because we had like those tests already done in the previous mission. But this one should still feel a lot should feel intense and have a lot of like spectacle and destruction. So the boss fight should feel dramatic and intense, always putting the player under pressure, and it should highlight the joint forces of all the factions, displaying the urgency to destroy the huge mech before it can actually like fire the bomb. So we want to have like a really close call there. So it should always be on the player should always be on their toes, but it should still feel like a great payoff that you managed to destroy this huge mech. Then we come into the pillars, and there are like for us to get everybody like on board early on, we wanted to communicate these like high design pillars very early, and want to combine like the different ideas that we had into like one coherent experience. And the two major pillars were like the constant pressure of the player, but also the clear communication that we wanted to have. Like an RTS can be quite complex, and missions can be quite complex, so we wanted to have a really solid understanding and clear communication of what's going on. And there's a lot going on. So these were shaping the general structure, including like the distinct phases that I already mentioned, the clear states of being attacked or like being vulnerable or not being vulnerable, We want to have clear communication about the attacks and the possibilities of the boss. And with all of these, we can like set then like a pacing curve describing the different gameplay beats, and the tension rises throughout the different phases. And yeah, just show the challenge and spectacle that we want to create. So now coming to the components, which is loading. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, the components, as I said, like if you look at them, there's a lot going on here. There are all the different heroes, like all fighting against this mech. The mech is currently like in charge, like charging this energy. You can see it opened up the weak spots on the legs and trying to communicate this way of now it's like in this vulnerable state. There are also some like minions that come up and walk towards the mech, trying to repair it. There's like there you can see these spheres, these electrical spheres, which are part of like an attack of the enemy, of the boss. So there are a lot of things going on. So before I just explain everything in there, I want to show some of the components and explain a little bit more about that, and we go in detail here. So yeah, we have all these components that I already mentioned, and with that we have like multiple smaller mechs, like the actors, that are like an addition to the boss, and they serve they serve as like a more of a priority shift, and like filling up this intensity, this intense fight between the different phases. And we also have like separate location that serve as power supplies for the bomb. So like the environment does play a role, and you can understand like where it's going, what you can already do in advance. And it also defines like the individual phases that escalate throughout the fight, because you notice when you play that it becomes like more difficult or more engaging throughout the overall progression of the fight when the mech is charging every time and trying to adapt its strategies with like new attacks and new behaviors. We definitely want to as it uses more and more moves, we want to communicate those clearly and having some like anticipation towards those, and also really having a understanding of the different shapes when it's walking and when it's charging, to communicate those like windows of opportunities, and make the player aware how to actually defeat the boss. Then the final finishing blow and like the finishing section is like, this was a pretty high challenge, but it's like a little bit scripted to actually achieve what we want, as I already mentioned beforehand, we wanted to create a very close call and like a feeling of just making it like at the last second you actually win this whole thing. And therefore we had to adjust a little bit and see like if we can create more intensity by actually tweaking a little bit on the last final section. And with that, like the final blow feels way more intense, and yeah, we can create a bigger climax, and also we reward the player then with the final cutscene of the overall game, and also like showing the credits obviously. And yeah, this one was definitely a bigger challenge to not make it feel awkward or like obvious that there's something going on, but it was worth it to actually achieve it. Unfortunately, there were, like as with every game development, other challenges influencing different parts, and we had to come up with compromises on certain things. We had to move in with like different difficulty settings and adjust certain things. So there were a lot of things going on, and I'm pretty proud of what the team achieved. and it was definitely a very, very big thing to work on something like this throughout the development, and also with all those crazy like VFX stuff that's happening. It was just fun to look at as well. Even if it's coming in late, you definitely have fun while going there. So with all that, I come a little bit to a conclusion on what the framework was feeling, or what it actually achieved for me. And for me personally, it helped me to create a solid base that I could build upon. Like I was able to create different systems that are like just grounded in a specific design space. And I was able to answer questions or decide on certain things based on this groundwork that we decided on and that we created. And I also just gained a better understanding of what was actually needed for such an encounter. So like for overall, for what a boss fight needs, and also what the limitations are. This was a very huge one, because obviously for RTS, like the perspective changes a lot, and height differences feel different. Communication needs to be different as well. So this one was also very huge for me. And yeah, it also served a lot of as like a fallback when we had some doubts about where we're going, where we're heading with certain elements. And yeah, overall, it was helping me personally a lot throughout the development. It also helped, yeah, just direction and the overall like ending of the campaign. And I hope that at least something of that is also helping you. And with that, we come to the next point, or to the first point again. What do Cartos and Mario have in common? So yeah, if you now look at these GIFs again, you should be able to understand there are quite a couple of elements that are that they share, that they like use in a similar, like that a similar purpose, like used for a similar purpose, as with like interacting, avoiding enemy attacks. There are a lot of like different things that you might be able now to see better than before. At least that's my hope. And with like this framework, I hope you can not only like analyze those things more and more easily, but you also may be able to yeah, construct a boss fight yourself that fits more into your game and is its own cool, very interesting experience. And that yeah, is the end of my talk. I thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it and had a bunch of different things that you might yeah, also be able to use. If you want to know more about Iron Harvest, you can check out our website. You can also take a look at our jobs page if you're interested in looking at another job, or if you're looking at like an internship. We always like looking for people. We are currently working on different projects of RTS, but also like as I mentioned, co-op action game. So we have a lot of cool stuff going on right now, and feel free to also connect with me via LinkedIn. Just let me know like where it's coming from, and then I'm happy to chat about anything design specific or career-wise or whatever. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Justin. Do you have time for Q&A?
Yeah.
Okay. There was a lot to take in. Would you mind going back to the slide that had the whole boss design framework?
Yeah, sure. Let me.
Because I think there was a lot of like a lot of good.
Oh. What happened now? I'm not sure.
And then.
Oh, now you.
Anyone here? You can just talk loudly and clearly, and Justin should be able to hear you. And anyone who's in the Zoom meeting, you can also unmute yourself and ask questions.
Just let me know if you can actually see the screen again.
This one, I think,
Okay.
because it had a lot of. Let's see if somebody has a question. Otherwise, I will have one.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question towards the workflow. You showed us the framework that you're working with, and I'm wondering that, and I think that many of the aspects like narrative and constraints are connected to each other and intersect a lot. So I wonder how you start your workflow, and for example, if you have constraints like the environment and the boss fight has to be set in that environment, how you deal with that difficulties in a boss design. And for example, also the design of the boss from an artist perspective. For example, when a boss can fly around the map or something, and the boss needs to be designed that way, or maybe even he is already designed and there's already a 3D model, how you deal with those difficulties.
Yeah, I guess like it comes down to your basic like challenges in design and compromising between different things. I mean, obviously, if you're designing a certain like element, in the best situation you want to be is that there hasn't been like a final decision on how it looks, because then you can play around with more ideas and communicate with like the art department just like directly at the beginning. You want to make sure that like the goals and the main features are something that you can both understand and try to achieve as like a, not like from different perspectives, but more or less from the same perspective or from the same vision. And like if there are something that is just like there, like as a constraint because you need it for a specific reason. Basically, what you or how you're working is that you like, for example, come up with different moves, and you want to check back on like the different parts and ask questions if it's like fulfilling these either constraints, or like if it's still fulfilling this pillar that you set up. And in most situations you talk about this with like the individual people working on it. Like with the example of the environment art, you could try to see like what's the important part that we definitely want to keep, which is something that we might even be able to change. We want to understand of like getting an understanding of what this actually means for the rest of the fight. So if there's a thing like a giant sword in the middle, what does this mean for the fight? Can we interact with it? Is it something that is used by the boss itself? Can we like adjust it in a way that makes more sense for the player, that there's like a barrier around it where it so that the player understands I cannot interact with it until a certain point. You definitely like try to come up with a lot of different questions. This is just probably like the nature of like trying to get to a certain point where you understand what you're like, where you're going for, like where you're heading at.
Yeah, do you have an example for the boss fight you designed for Iron Harvest? Like, did you already knew all the heroes that would be in the fight, or the minions? I mean, I think a lot of aspects come with different iterations of the process of making games. So
yeah, there were a lot of different things that we needed to compromise on, or that we needed to change. Like with the heroes, for example, that you mentioned, there was in the beginning we had another hero in mind that would be able to be in that fight, because we haven't like looked at specific like story beats yet. And like I was really happy with this like character in the boss fight, because it just worked on so many different levels of, let's say there was like a feeling of you being very powerful and being able to destroy a lot of enemies. Right now, we like in the actual end result, we have, for example, the big mech Brunhilde, which is like a giant, huge tank mech that can destroy a lot of like those smaller like enemies, those crawling spider-like enemies. And like this feeling of you being powerful enough to like destroy those smaller bits, like smaller mechs in an instant, is something that I wanted to achieve. And even though we were not able to do it like with like this specific unit, we were still able to do it with Brunhilde and with some other abilities that we have. And yeah, also the enemies were also a huge challenge to like get it understand or get it right, basically, in terms of we have a scope that we need to hit. We cannot like design so many like different minions that all have their own unique thing going on. But we were able to create like, for example, this small working mech that is actually coming at you in a swarm of like multiple enemies. We were able to make another version of that, which is basically like a energy tank that walks around towards the boss and trying to charge it, and you can destroy it. So there was a lot of like synergy where we just make use of something and iterate on that. But it was a challenge to like not only design them for the boss encounter, but also make use of them in other like missions. And yeah, overall, I think it definitely worked out fine. We had a lot of back and forth with like the art department, with like effects, communication of like how the electrical fields should look like, or how like repairing the boss should look like. So there was a lot of back and forth, but it at least was worth it.
Okay, thank you. And I have also 2 other questions, but I would like to ask them when it's not recorded, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
That's more a question like to Daniel, if that's possible.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, in general, if you have any like other things that like is not like specific to this topic, feel free to just hit me up via Twitter or LinkedIn. Anything works. We can also just like talk afterwards.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Cool. All right, anyone else? Alex?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So it was on one of the last slides, yes.
Okay.
With the giant neck and the boss fight, where I think it was the looping gift, where all the player units attacked it while it was charging. So I noticed the charging station itself does not look that durable. Can the player actually interact with it? Can usually destroy it? Yeah, they're exactly so those pillars that are charging the boss. I mean, okay, the bases does kind of look kind of sturdy, but I mean, it's essentially just Iron 6 coming out of it. Can the player actually attack them, sabotage them, anything like that? Or are they interactionless?
So for what we ended up with, it and what the final result is that they are not interactable. They are actually within their like, let's say, base, and just move out as soon as the boss interacts with it and like position itself. Then they move out and like start to charge. And when like the enemy is gone, they actually go back into the base to communicate that you cannot interact with them. However, it was actually like the plan in one of the earlier concepts that you were able to like select and like damage a specific charging pole on its own, and like think about if you want to either try to put your damage into one of those and like reduce the energy that the boss is draining from it, But like overall, like in the end, we decided against it because it was a bit too complex for what we wanted to achieve, as it like asked or created more questions and more questions about the flow of the fight and how like the enemy would interact or react to that. So that's why we ended up with just a more rather simple version of you actually like hitting not the poles, but you just hitting the charging mech when it's opening up these legs and showing the weak spots. Yeah, does it like answer your question?
Yes, I was just surprised that they. I mean, I figured there was probably some plan to involve them in the fight because they still look, yeah, like you should be able to destroy them. That's why I was.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we definitely had to like compromise and see what's possible within our scope, and yeah, how to make use of the communication that we can still like achieve.
Okay,
cool.
Katarina, did you have a question earlier?
I have another question. Yes.
Sure, go ahead.
I was wondering about the documentation and communication of all the results you get when you research your boss fight, because I imagine that just writing it down in a text how the boss fight should work isn't very efficient, and you don't have a good overview. So do you use spreadsheets for that? And also when you're answering all those questions, you still don't have a boss fight, right? Because then you just have many answers, and there can be many different boss fights you can create from that.
Yeah, it's like for the first part, it's definitely there's more to it than just like writing everything down in like a design doc. Obviously, it's definitely a part of the process, and what helped us to actually communicate and sell like the idea of the boss fight was that I created like a pitch like a pitch presentation basically about the order of events. So how the different gameplay beats work, how the phases work, and like how like for example like creating a pacing graph and all these things help to communicate what you have in mind. And we also did a bunch of different like Excel sheets. Like for example, I created a Excel document that was more or less calculating how much damage output the players have, like the units and their abilities over time, and based on that, how much health and energy is needed to actually create that sense of you racing, trying to like reduce the health, but also the mech gaining energy, and there should be like this feeling of a close call. So we had to take a look at it from like a numbers perspective, but also then after from these numbers of Excel, you definitely want to go in and actually like play it out, like play through it, try to adjust it based on that. We had a lot of different aspects in like how long it should take, how fast like the charging should work, and there was a lot of just testing involved. And for the other departments, there was also just a lot of like referencing and like searching for references and communicating your ideas just with like drawing on over screenshots and stuff like that. And yeah, that's basically it for what we did around just like the basic documents and design docs. And for the other part, yes, it's definitely not giving you like a boss fight for free, and there's a lot of things where you need to not only have like the answers to certain questions, but you also have just an understanding of where you want to go, but you actually have to like do work and create different systems and design on like the move sets, for example, that I explained. And this is where, like for me personally, where I like work with a lot of the vision that I set up. And a good example might be the enemies. So like one of the smaller enemies, they were some like their purpose was that they fill up this this factory and make it feel more like bigger than it actually is, and also creates a lot of like pressure on the player. So we decided we wanted to on one side increase the squad size. Like all our squads had like 5 units for the player like infantry, and these were then 7 units to communicate like that feeling of like bigger swarms. They were coming up in like a lot of like multiple like spawns, so we had to also think about how we're going to do that, as we wanted to be able to spawn them like regularly and create this feeling of constant pressure throughout the whole fight. So not only from the beginning, but with multiple phases being able to spawn them. And that's then like a reason for us that we created shafts that are like moving up those enemies, or like that they crawl out of the ground and actually attacking you from there. So all these things came from like a vision and purpose side. And then we thought about like how we can achieve that with within the constraints, within the scope. And obviously, as I said, with like the other example previously, there are things where we need to compromise, and we have like pitches, we have concepts and ideas that we think about, that we might even prototype, but eventually we need to cut it or we need to adjust it. Maybe also like one other example was how the boss itself works, like in a RTS perspective. That was something that we very easily prototype just with blocks in the game space. Like you could play and you see basically like an enemy out of blocks with like these 3 different legs standing somewhere, and then trying to create those different shapes. Just like very dirty work, so to say, very easy work, but it definitely helps.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Okay. Justin, I'm curious, since this is an RTS, Iron Harvest, that you designed for, is there a point where the player might start the boss battle with a different amount of resources than you had intended? Like if it's at the end of the level and maybe I suck at base building and I only got my 5 soldiers, and then the boss battle starts, and like suddenly I can't win the boss battle because, as you calculated, you need this much DPS to finish it, and maybe I don't have that much. Yeah,
I think there are like 2 points to it. Like first of all, that's one of the reasons why we said like this like boss fight is its own thing, and we like let you start with like a set amount of units, and it's clear that you like have a starting point that is like every time same starting point.
I see.
So that was one thing. Like also that we don't want to invest too much with like the base building and creating like this resource management aspect, as you said, like that can quickly like snowball you into a certain direction. And yeah, the other thing is that throughout the fight let's say so we already anticipated that with those with those heroes, you might end up in situations where one of them dies. Like in our game, they like not really die, they just become unconscious, and then you can revive them. However, it definitely puts you in a spot where you need to invest the time to actually get them back into your army, and then you can use them again. So the DPS drops because you need to invest the time, and you also have one less available right now. And with those in mind, I mean, we thought about different kinds of things, where in the beginning we thought about maybe we have like a medic tent that you can actually use to revive them. Maybe there's some system where they can like pick up more, like for example, we introduced more health crates on certain like positions where we thought like maybe it's good to just give the player a bit more options there. But in the end, what also helped is that we we calculate what's going on in the fight, and based on that create some kind of some like moments where you feel like you're more able to actually like get something back, get someone back on their feet, and therefore then like adjust the overall pacing. It was one of the first things where we talked about whether the boss fight should be difficult, and if it's something that would feel frustrating if you manage to get through like all of it, and especially as the last one is pretty difficult, the last mission before that. We wanted to create a boss fight that feels more intense than it actually is difficult. And that's why we're tweaking a little bit behind the scenes, so to say, to still create this experience of like a challenging fight and a lot of stuff is going on, but it might not be the most difficult. So you can still, even though you you lost one of your heroes, you might be able to actually like finish it, because it might feel very frustrating. And that was the reason. If you still fight, and in the end you just like, it's the last hit, and you can see if you would have like 2 seconds more you would win, and then you lose. And that's why we decided we wanted to give it a bit more, let's say, buffer zone for the feeling of success, and that you can actually make it.
That's like a dynamic difficulty approach, so that you can soft lock yourself out of finishing the encounter by like losing a bunch of heroes or units.
Exactly. Yeah, it was a big challenge, like from a scripting perspective. Like if you take a look at that, like my scripting was its own huge thing. Like not only the AI behavior, like I like the boss behavior is like completely custom made, and therefore I was able to just like tweak a lot of different stuff, like the duration of how much it, like how long it takes to gain the energy, but also like how much like health is still left for the for the boss. And with these I was able to adjust the difficulty throughout the fight.
So it sounds like you wanted to, and that's something that was kind of missing for me. What was missing in the design framework here is the number of attempts that I'm supposed to take to finish a boss. So like speaking from my own personal experience, playing games like Dark Souls or Hollow Knight, it's like when I meet a boss and I can beat them on the first try, it's like, well, that wasn't really a boss. So even if it's difficult, well, they didn't even kill me once, and I managed to beat them. So I really want this frustration, so to die to them, and then come back and learn their patterns, and in this way finally succeed. But also I don't want to die like 100 times and never be able to beat them. So for me it's really difficult to say like how many attempts should a boss take to finish. Yeah,
it's definitely also like a more question of what you can, like what you already learned as a player throughout the overall game, of what you feel comfortable with. Because of a Dark Souls game, you go in with the with that in mind, that you definitely die a lot of times. And in other games, it might not be the case, that you think you're dying a lot. So you definitely need to take that into consideration. Like the target audience in the sense would be like, that's why I have it here. It would be a point where you adjust the difficulty for the player type and you use what they think is working or is not working. And then you go in and what you expressed a little bit seemed to me like a bit more of a experience thing. So like in the purpose sense. So you want to create that very challenging experience where you die a lot, but then the payoff is just a lot bigger. And that is where you would like there's a concept of what's the word? Shit. I forgot the name, but it's like hard fun, basically. Like that's one of the 4 types of fun, where it's about actually like the challenge.
Earn fun or something like that. Yeah. So I see the for the purpose. I was also thinking that could also be the mechanical intent. Like if the boss has a specific pattern that you need to learn, and if you haven't learned it yet, if you can't execute it perfectly yet, you die. That could also be a mechanical challenge. So like
those. Yeah, exactly. Those like skill gates happen a lot in games, especially in the beginning. Like a good example is, for example, the first boss in like the new God of War, the fighting against the stranger, which was like a very like intense fight, and there was a lot going on. But what it actually was teaching you is how to react to enemies, how to avoid enemy attacks, how to use like the different like abilities. It was more even in a sense a bit of a tutorial and a skill gate to actually make you or set you up for the rest of the game. So it's definitely a solid point, yes.
Right.
Cool.
So if I have anything else.
If you have any other questions, go ahead. Otherwise, as I said, feel free to reach me via Twitter, via LinkedIn. We can also just take it to private real quick. I'm pretty open to talk about anything.
Yeah, and right at the beginning of the talk where you introduced yourself, you mentioned that your background is in more like action games, not RTS.
Yeah, that's like more like my personal point of view, so to say. Like from a gaming perspective, I just feel way more comfortable with like playing a lot of the more action games, and I wasn't like I started at King Art working on like a different game, and then switched over to the RTS, to Ironhouse. For that, like I gained a lot of knowledge about how RTS work, and was doing a lot of research. And like our reference games, there was obviously like Company of Heroes, Warcraft, Starcraft, a lot of those, and took a look at what they are doing, also what they are doing in terms of like boss design, because it's definitely different. But yeah, it's like on my personal preferences, I'm coming more from like an action heavy side.
Is there a key difference you see in action game boss fights versus real-time strategy boss design?
Yeah, there's definitely some changes in like in the approach, and just like in if we're looking at the constraints, the core mechanics are like completely different, or let's say maybe not completely different, but they are so different that it creates a ripple effect on the other parts, because the like core loop for like a God of War and the fighting system there is way more like can be way more second to second and based on the character controls and the timing and all these things, whereas like an RTS might be way more on the macro level than on the micro side, and where it's way more about strategizing and how you're going to like do things and not when to do them, basically. So that's definitely a difference. However, as I said, like this framework is like these elements are all set up work, obviously without like a genre specific thing. But when you work through it from like top to bottom, you definitely know that things steer to a certain path because of the decisions and the constraints and stuff that you had beforehand.
Makes sense. All right. Let's stop the recording here.
Cool.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.